Another reason why these things should not be on our walkways. How am I supposed to get past this piece of shit? There it is, a scooter sitting right in the middle of the walkway. Why? Why do they do this, huh? Because they're retarded. Damn, get this thing off the sidewalk, morons. Spin.
Actually was a setup for something that ends up not going well and actually is the spark that began the American Revolution.
So with these British troops now in Boston, which is really kind of it's known as the cradle of liberty. I mean, many of the big ideas and early leaders in this revolutionary patriotic struggle are centered in Boston. And so with tensions being so high and British troops now patrolling through the town, it leads to what we call the Boston Massacre, where a big mob of Americans upset about these oppressions that the king is forcing on them go out and start protesting against the British and the British soldiers in the street, and words are exchanged.
Yeah, and let's walk through that because it's kind of an interesting unfolding of the story because even like John Adams' role in this becomes very interesting. So because tension is mounting in the midst of this, there is a young American walking through the streets, and there's a British soldier who apparently, allegedly, this is where the story goes, heard this young American say something insulting about a British officer, and maybe wanting to help this young American know that you can't say something bad about a British officer. It was reported he took his gun butt and he struck the young child on the head, and the child cries out. And there's people around. Some are seeing this happen. Some hear the noise, and they come around, and they see this soldier standing over this young American who's now been clubbed in the head with this rifle butt. And so there's a lot of tension mounting. Well, as the Americans surround this sole British soldier, word gets back to a commanding officer for the British and says, hey, one of your guys is about to be eliminated. So this British officer sends other troops. He says, hey, fix your bayonets, go and secure the scene. So they show up with fixed bayonets, but all they're doing is even maybe heightening the tension. And so when they show up, they form a little perimeter. They have the Americans on one side, and the Americans are super frustrated. Big picture with the tyranny, the oppression, and now the British, and they have loaded guns and fixed bayonet pointed at this crowd. So the reports were the crowd started picking up initially maybe snowballs, except there was a report of a lot of
them with a little extra.
Yeah, there were some rocks involved. There were some sticks involved. And so as this unfolds, what happened is one of the Americans ends up throwing a rock, a stick, at one of the British. And a rock, a stick, for the history of the world has been a lethal weapon. You can absolutely kill someone with a rock and a stick. And so as this object is being thrown at one of these soldiers, one of the soldiers fires in the crowd. When the shot goes off, the other soldiers fire a volley in the crowd. And when this is fired, there were 3 Americans that were killed instantly. There were 8 that were wounded. 2 died later from those injuries. But of the initial Americans who had been shot and killed, the most famous was an individual named Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was a black American patriot. He had formerly been a slave, escaped to freedom in the North, and now he was a patriot with other American patriots opposing the British. And it's kind of interesting that the first bloodshed in this scenario was a black patriot. Where it becomes more interesting is as this unfolds, John Adams is an attorney in Boston, and the British, who John Adams is not a fan of the British right now, but the British have heard John Adams is such an honorable man that they actually seek out him to represent these soldiers in the Boston Massacre.
Because after the massacre, the case goes to trial. And so in that trial, Adams represents the British, and you can actually read a lot about the trial proceedings. It's very interesting. And he remarks that he did lose some of his kind of, I guess, street cred, you could say, in the Patriot movement for doing this, but he conducted himself, like you mentioned, so honorably throughout it that really nobody was able to question his patriotic bona fides. But in reflecting back on the incident of the Boston Massacre, later John Adams really starts to understand the significance of that moment, and in a letter he writes to a historian many years later who is starting to work and compile the early history of the United States, he explains that however slightly soever historians may have passed over this event, the blood of the martyrs, right or wrong, proved to be the seed needs of the congregation. Not the Battle of Lexington or Bunkers Hill, not the surrender of Burgoyne or Cornwallis were more important events in American history than the Battle of King Street on the 5th of March, 1770. King Street is where the Boston Massacre happened. So John Adams, who was very involved in this, looks back later and says, really, this is where the American Revolution starts, is in Boston at the Boston Massacre.
And the cause of liberty.
Expanding these possibilities of deterrence with nuclear weapons on the part of France. And of course, it is most worth considering.
Nuclear umbrella would serve as really very serious deterrence towards.
They want to start World War III.
Olaf Scholz stressed Europe should not give up on U.S. involvement in nuclear deterrence.
We must ensure, with a cool and intelligent head, that the support of the United States is also maintained in the coming months and years.
Coming months and years. How much longer you want it to go?
Posed a threat.
If they call a meeting of the chiefs of general staff of European countries in Britain, if they say that it is necessary to use nuclear weapons, to prepare to use nuclear weapons against Russia, this is, of course, a threat.
According
Idiots.
to the Federation of American Scientists, Russia and the US are the world's biggest nuclear powers, with over 5,000 nuclear warheads each. France has 290 and Britain 225. However, the exact number of weapons in each country's arsenal is unknown because it's a closely held national
They
secret.
are idiots.
NTD News.
President Macron declaring that Europe was entering a new era. I want to zoom in here on what he said about NATO members potentially putting troops on the ground in Ukraine without American support. Is this really viable for NATO's European members?
Well, they certainly can try. They simply don't have the army forces to take on a concerted Russian thrust into Ukraine. And the Russians will also be attacking the Baltics and possibly Poland as well. So this all will challenge the European ability to deploy adequate peacekeeping troops to Ukraine.
And I think it's also important to note here that France is still saying that it remains committed to both NATO and its partnership with the U.S. Do you see what the leaders in Europe are doing right now as perhaps a way to show the U.S., hey, we are stepping up, we're putting in the effort, so we're going to hope that you stay in this as well. Do you think that's what they're doing?
To a large degree, yes. They would clearly prefer that the United States remain in NATO, remain committed, as it has been for over 50 years, to deterring attacks from the former Soviet Union and Russia, and remaining committed to deterring conflict, war in Europe.
We also know that Macron is raising
I haven't done anything yet.
the protection of its nuclear arsenal to its allies. So my question here is, what kind of impact does this move have if it goes ahead? How would we see Russia respond?
Well, the Russians will have to take all of that very seriously. But I would also add that Russia has been taking the nuclear balance far more seriously than even the United States. We credit Russia with having about 2,000 non-strategic nuclear weapons. Other sources estimate that Russia may have up to 10,000 tactical nuclear weapons to use against targets in Europe. France and Britain's nuclear arsenals simply don't approach this the power of the Russian force, and would offer an inadequate deterrent without considering the addition of American nuclear forces. So the Europeans have a great amount of catch-up in the nuclear balance to undertake.
Speaking of catch-up, we know
was humbly pleading with European leaders for additional military aid. Ukraine's Ministry of Finance records showed that First Lady Olena was in Paris, dropping 40,000 euros on a custom haute couture gown. The irony? That one dress alone could have covered the heating bills of 200 families in Kiev for an entire month, and that's not all. While Zelensky showed up at the G7 summit in a wrinkled, outdated suit asking for more support, Olena was adding a brand new 12,000 euro Cartier piece to her jewelry collection. But the most shocking detail? The 4.8 million euro Bugatti supercar sitting sitting in her garage, officially registered as a government vehicle for the presidential office. Even more absurd, Zelensky himself approved this purchase using a wartime special budget allocation from the Ministry of Finance.
Play a soundbite from the vice president's speech earlier. Let's play the clip.
And I will say that the most heartening message that I take away from my visit here at the Texas border is the number of Border Patrol agents who have come up to me and said thank you, or said because of this, we've cut the number of border crossings from 1,500 a day to 30 a day. Or the people who have come up and said we've seen a reduction in 85% of the number of people who are dying at the American southern border.
Hector, if you could, give us your reaction to this statement. It sounds like it's addressing you and the people that you serve. Walk us through the changes that are happening there under President Trump's leadership.
So there are recent changes that are happening on the border thanks to President Trump. Our president, Paul Perez, with the National Border Patrol Council, was present today at Eagle Pass and did have conversations with Vice President Vance. And the rhetoric and the information that's coming from all of our agents is that the border is much more secure. We're now able to focus on these dangerous criminals that are bringing dangerous drugs across. We're no longer seeing those asylum seekers that were basically abusing the asylum system. Now, under President Trump, we're able to actually focus on the real mission of border security. We also are very grateful for the Department of Defense. They've been doing an amazing job, bringing amazing technology that's going to help us battle the cartels.
To Attorney General Pam Bondi asking her to close down this facility.
It has just attracted a drug trade to a family residential community.
Damn, they fixed it. Took them long enough.